The year 2020, a year originally filled with so much hope. The introduction of a new decade, a clean slate, a new beginning. A year that began with so much optimism that the world would change and that all the problems of the previous decade will be fixed. Sadly, that cannot be further from the truth. So far in the year 2020, the human population has experienced waves of tragedy, month after month, beginning firstly with the bushfires raging across Australia, burning down 18.6 million hectares and killing and displacing over 3 billion animals. Then followed by drone strikes taking down an Iranian general, almost beginning World War III. All of that on top of the then new COVID-19 virus, decimating the Chinese population. Now that's crazy for just 1 year. All of that was in the first month of the year 2020. It could only go up from here, right? Additional to all the tragedy surrounding the year only in the first few months, a worldwide pandemic has entered the battalion against humanity. The COVID-19 virus, first identified in Wuhan, China in the December of 2019, was a deadly epidemic, growing, learning from its mistakes, adapting to all and every way people have tried to stop it. A deadly force harming almost everyone coming in contact with it, expanding from one nation to now infecting over 188 different countries and territories, infecting more than 26.8 million people worldwide and killing 900,000. Whilst the physical effects of the COVID-19 are reported and known, the mental effects of the conditions the virus has forced many to live through is a subject not talked about when researching the topic. Looking at the 4-month quarantine lasting from March 11th in the Netherlands and surrounding dates in other European nations, all the way until July of the same year, some observations could be made about the possible effects that could have on the human brain. Humans are social creatures, built physiologically to aid one another in order to achieve a common goal, to collaborate, interact. It is how our civilization has developed this far and achieved this much. Our survival was assured through the development of behaviors and physiological mechanisms such as pointing, all the way to entire patterns of speech. Our social abilities are the reason why our species has survived this long and is the biggest reason why humans are at the top of the food chain. And now, for the large chunk of the last 6 months, that core ability that has allowed humans to survive for so long has been challenged more than ever. Many were split from their families due to lockdown restrictions, stuck in foreign countries, and many had their livelihoods ruined. This sudden shift into isolation that was enforced in most countries, beginning around March of 2020, affected many in such horrible ways. Some lost their jobs, some lost their sanity, and some lost their lives. Whilst a necessary precaution in containing the pandemic raging through the streets of the world, the side effects of said precaution has caused many to derail into severe mental health problems that can affect them for a large portion of their lives. The current generation, that me as well as 1.2 billion adolescents are a part of, have been dealt a bad hand when it comes to how our future looks. With economies crashing, wars escalating, the environment dying. This could cause a lot of stress on a young mind simply reading into how his or her future is going to look like. These events occurring worldwide has caused many adolescents within our current generation to develop stress-related mental disorders such as anxiety and depression. Problems that have plagued our young minds for decades due to many different reasons, whether that be due to domestic issues, loved ones passing away, the stress of a new education curriculum, the pressure put on them by their loved ones, just to name a few. These already existing problems are now made effectively worse through the chronic loneliness and self-isolation that a majority of people have had to experience for many months. But for some, it has affected them in a different way, sometimes more positively. These are all aspects that the following information will explore. The following information covers the mental health effects of the lockdown on adolescents in both discordant and regular family situations. The ensuing research also outlines the symptoms that are likely to arise from chronic loneliness and social isolation, caused as a side effect of the COVID-19 lockdown. Since the March of 2020, the majority of children and adolescents from nations all over the globe have been experiencing a prolonged state of physical and social isolation from their fellow peers and compatriots, as well as their extended family, teachers, community networks in the form of sports teams, or other extracurricular activities. Whilst the results of how adults react to long periods of social isolation and loneliness have been established, it is relatively unknown how these measures could have possibly affected the mental health of children and adolescents. Let's have a more in-depth look into how some adolescents have been dealing with their lives and mental health over the past 6 months. Mental illness, anxiety, depression, all problems that have majorly affected the teenage demographic of this generation for many different reasons. Now, with the lockdown instated 5 months ago, that has caused many to lose their livelihood and some even their lives. The past couple months has caused many to fall into the deep hole that is anxiety and depression. And for some, it has had positive effects regarding less social anxiety or gaining creativity. How would you say you have been affected?
Well, I think my life, it's been really hit hard, and I think my mental state has been worsened a bit because before I used to just live a normal life, like a normal student life, nothing special, and now because of the lockdown, I can't really do anything. I can just sit at home and either play video games, watch television, or just do school stuff, which is all boring.
So you'd say your life is out of balance?
Yeah, it definitely is.
Well, basically before the quarantine, I didn't have any restrictions. So basically I was just going out playing with my friends, doing sports. But now with the current situation and the lockdown previously, we couldn't do anything that we wanted to.
I think I have been affected mentally because before the quarantine/lockdown, didn't have any mental disorders such as depression or anxiety. But during the quarantine/lockdown, when I was in Japan, as my family decided to move to Japan for a little while, I kind of felt a bit depressed because I couldn't meet any of my friends and I didn't really have a social life, even though I was talking with people online. But that didn't really do the trick for me, and it really started kicking in maybe 3 months after I was in quarantine. Yeah.
So you would say you felt a lot of, due to your lack of social interaction, you felt generally down for most of your time during quarantine?
Yeah, well, sometimes I had really happy times, but it was kind of like a wave, because sometimes I was really down, and for some days I was half of the day I was really happy, and then the other half I was just not feeling anything and it was just completely down.
How was your mental state previous to the lockdown?
Well, it was just nothing special. As I said, a normal student life. Sometimes you're stressed because of some assignment you have to do. Sometimes you're happy because you got a good grade, and yeah.
So you didn't experience any like problems such as depression, anxiety?
No, I didn't. I wasn't depressed. Maybe sometimes anxiety, like mildly, because of, as I said, assignments. If I wasn't like fast enough to do them, but otherwise, I would say I was pretty okay.
How was your mental state previous to the lockdown?
Previous to the lockdown, my mental state was completely fine. Really didn't have any mental disorders. I was, doing, I think, anything a normal teenager would do. Just playing around with friends, acting normal. But I guess with the quarantine, it all changed.
How would you say it changed?
Well, just completely the opposite, I think, because I feel like when I was in school before quarantine, I was like really kind of, loud, I guess, and just happy overall. But like during online classes, during quarantine, I was just like down most of the times.
This specific interviewee wanted to stay anonymous, so I will read out what she has written. My mental state before the lockdown was not very good. I had stopped going to school. I had stayed in bed all day, and sometimes I would barely eat too. I had no motivation for anything, and it was very hard to get me to do anything. I had given up on myself, despite not showing it to my friends and my outside family. Has quarantine had a large effect on how you live your life? If so, how have you adapted your routines to be COVID-friendly?
I would say not really, because as you sit at home, you get like less and less things to do, because you just get tired of doing the same thing every day repetitively for basically months and months. But I think I would say like I found new hobbies. Maybe like before I wasn't really like into like looking into world problems or like news, but the lockdown it made me like notice what's happening around me rather than just in my own bubble. So I would say like before I didn't know what would happen somewhere in Asia, but now I would know because of news. I used to go to like trampoline jumping lessons where I would do tricks and stuff like that, and I think that also was affected because I can't just get a trampoline in my house and jump on it.
Yes, well, during quarantine when my mum went for grocery shopping, we would get the groceries back and then we would wipe all of them with disinfectant because COVID could be an object around us. So we were, cautious of that. So everything we bought, we, wiped, masks, we also washed, or, we used different, we put tissue papers in paper masks. And for example, we also never wore the same clothes twice, as COVID-19 would have maybe already been on our clothes. And we also took a shower after we went outside.
So you had to really that is a big difference than just going outside, being completely unaware of your surroundings, than to just switch to always having to be aware of everything near you, making sure that you're not close to other people. That must have been harsh.
It is a big difference, because I didn't really, care about it that much before quarantine, but now it's all changed.
Quarantine almost came like a miracle to me. No more being forced out to go to school, no more having to go outside and meet people. My routine previous COVID were always staying at home, checking ManageBack, even though I didn't do the work, eating a little bit, and going to sleep. I barely went outside, and I avoided doing so. Therefore, my routine didn't change at all. Has the lockdown allowed you to be more focused on school or personal goals that you were trying to achieve?
I think so, and around the start, as it was just the start, and I was like, yay, let's go, because it's quarantine and school was closed. So I would focus a lot more on stuff I like to do at home rather than school. But as it got closer to what it is now, I would say I got kind of bored of doing everything that I like to do, and I kind of got burned out. So I'm more focused on school right now. It's like it became more fun for me to do schoolwork rather than just play video games or watch television all day.
So, the longer you were in lockdown, that caused you to get more and more focused to school because you were getting worse grades, or because you noticed that you were slacking?
Because I noticed that I was slacking, I guess.
Just playing games mostly?
Yeah.
For some stuff, yes, but it's not really like school, but I feel like there was a wave, like I said. Sometimes I would like have insane work ethics and just be really concentrated, but sometimes I just couldn't get around to working. But I did pick up new skills and hobbies throughout, and I feel like those new skills and hobbies, I really concentrated on them because I was really bored during quarantine.
Yes. So you were, school-wise, how focused were you able to be?
For like tasks such as essays, sometimes I had I could write a whole essay in under 2 hours, but sometimes I just couldn't do anything because in my mind I was like, oh, I should work the deadlines in a week or so, but I just couldn't get around to working until the last day.
Yeah, so you would say you waited until the exact end of when a deadline is to do the work.
Most of the times, yes.
So less organized, basically. Quarantine caused your schedule to be less organized?
Well, yes, I guess, but I did have way more time, so I could organize things a bit better, but I didn't really organize. But when I did organize, it did go really well.
I believe that the lockdown opened an opportunity for me to work on myself in a calm state with no rush. Although I only attended online classes for a few days before stopping that too, I wanted to figure out myself in these few months so that I'll be able to start fresh next year. Have you been able to maintain motivations for school or your personal routines for self-betterment throughout the lockdown? If not, how have the previous months you have spent in self-isolation made you lose motivation, whether that be in physical, mental, or social activity?
As I said, as you sit longer in lockdown, you start to notice things that are outside of your bubble. You start to become more open-minded. And I think that has a large effect on your mental health because you start to notice not just the positive things in life, but also the negatives, whether it affects you or it doesn't. Like you would see that people are dying somewhere in Africa, even if before you didn't know that. Now that you know that, you're less motivated because you understand it's you can't solve it. It's something bad, but you can't solve it. And also, as I said, I would go to trampoline and jumping lessons. And now that I don't, I'm much less sporty. I have lost my stamina to for sports. I can't really run as long as I used to before.
So you have gained motivation for mental activities but lost for physical activities?
I would say so, yeah.
But what about for social activity? Do you think you have become more introverted throughout lockdown?
I would say yes, because I started to notice that life isn't always about going out, showing how good you are, and I started to take care of myself more. I started to when my friends would go somewhere during lockdown, I would be like, why would you go outside because it's lockdown? That's harmful, not just for others but also for you. And I think, yeah, that's about it.
Actually, I kind of like gave up going outside kind of, because for me, when I went outside, for example, school, or like going outside to play with my friends, or going to like my after school activities, those were like my definition of going out. So like actually going outside really got boring for me, because when I was in self-isolation, I had my laptop and I could connect with my friends using the laptop, but I couldn't really connect with my friends if I went outside. So I found like no purpose for going outside. But I mean, I did gain some motivation in some places, because I thought of, picking up new hobbies such as guitar. I still play guitar until now, and I feel like if quarantine wasn't a thing, then I wouldn't have picked guitar up. Yeah.
That is interesting. So you'd say the massive amounts of spare time you had allowed you to pick up some hobbies as well?
Yeah.
If anything, the lockdown gave me more motivation, because it meant that I had a chance to start over without having to constantly talk to people about how I'm doing. It gave me a chance to have some me time. Toward the end of quarantine, I started doing slight work again. However, I was demotivated overall to work throughout most of quarantine. Do you think that the quarantine has caused your mental health to destabilize, or previously occurring conditions to grow worse? If you do think that you have gotten worse, why do you think that is?
As I said again, like you start to notice the negative things in life. You become like more open-minded, and it just destabilizes your mind to think that something bad can not only happen to you, but can only happen to other people, but also to you. And I think when something happens, if it's anyone, when something happens to themselves, you notice it much more than if someone else was affected. So I think, yeah.
So you've become a lot more aware of your surroundings. That has caused you to feel more scared, because you're noticing that if you go out in a certain way and if you talk to certain people, you might catch a virus that could hurt your family.
Not just scared or the virus, it just because lockdown, it forces you to stay home, and you try to find things which would entertain you, but the more you look into it, the less entertaining it becomes, the more real it becomes. And it's not that it's scary, it's just that it's what it can happen to anyone. It's just reality, I guess.
Well, like I said, I didn't have any mental depression or anxiety or anything, but I feel like after the quarantine, even until now, I can meet with my friends now, but a limited time, and I feel like I feel more sad inside. I don't really feel I feel really tired inside most of the times. Before
So you
the
feel that-
quarantine. Sorry?
Yeah, sorry. So you feel that before the quarantine, you were able to be more active. You had more social battery than now.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Wow, that's very interesting. So you'd say your social ability has gotten worse since quarantine
Well,
began.
not my complete social skills. I can still talk with basically everyone, but I kind of just feel tired after just talking with people, because I just didn't do it for such a long time. And even just going to school mentally exhausts me kind of. Whereas before it was completely fine for me.
So would you say you've gotten more introverted?
Definitely.
I believe that the quarantine was a bit uncontrollable. It was nice because I had my own time to think alone. However, sometimes being alone for so long got overwhelming and caused me to get breakdowns from time to time. I don't think that the quarantine affected me too much due to how unstable I already was. Do you have any loved ones that have caught or are highly susceptible to catching the virus? And if so, how has that changed your mindset on the COVID-19 lockdown?
No, I don't have any relatives, unless it's old people, of course. But I would say that I definitely, not, necessarily care, but I do, notice if it happens to any of my friends or people that I just know, if it happens to their family, of course it would be sad for them, but I also notice it, and I'm not just gonna be like, oh, I don't really care. I'm just gonna be like, oh, the best of wishes to them.
And has that changed your mindset towards the lockdown?
Definitely, I would say.
So you think you're much safer yourself to help not only your family but your friends?
Yeah.
Well, no one around me has really caught the coronavirus, but people around me's siblings or their closest ones has caught COVID-19, and I try to think that if we all do a better job in trying to contain ourselves, I guess, by not doing anything before COVID-19 regulations, if we do that, we can save more people. But it is also very hard. And for example, my family, my mom's not the healthiest, and I'm also not the healthiest because I have asthma and stuff, and it could be pretty deadly for some people. So I will try my best to try and not get or spread the virus.
Yeah, so you've been much more strict on yourself than others have been due to your mother or yourself possibly catching the virus, and due to asthma possibly having much worse things happening to you with the virus.
I just think we should not treat this that easily, because some people could treat it easily, as some people could beat COVID-19 easily, but for other people that might not be the case.
Yes. Looking at it just on a selfish basis, that is really not healthy for this country. Since the numbers are going up because people are saying, well, it doesn't affect me, so why should I care? But it's not about them, it's about them spreading it to other people. And you've done well there. No loved ones or family have caught COVID. However, I was worried for my grandparents since the cases in their country are very bad, and they did not want to be treated like they were useless, so they went out to do the shopping themselves, rather than ordering online, which gave me quite a fright. However, they do not seem to catch the virus, and that is what I am happy about. For my cousins, aunts, and uncles, I wasn't necessarily worried, because people can survive COVID at that age. What advice would you give to people going through the same issues as you?
I would say yes. It's just that as I said, you shouldn't overthink what's gonna happen tomorrow, but you should just think what's happening right now, what you can do to help stop or do something, and just that's about it. I would say just don't overthink what's gonna happen tomorrow. Don't try to fix something that's already happened because it's in the past. Just live in the moment.
It is a good opportunity to pick up new hobbies, and I did pick up entertainment, I guess, because I didn't really, for example, YouTube. I kept on watching the same YouTubers over again before quarantine, but after and during quarantine, I just was really bored, so I went out on kind of a journey to find more entertainment. And I think the best thing is to connect with your friends and talk to the people who you are closest to, because talking to anyone really does help. Even if you don't think it helps, it really does help. For example, I talked with my friends about the situation I was in, and they could empathize with me, and we could always have a fun time together. So I think the best tip is to stay with the ones who you are closest to, and just try and not get into a deep hole you can't get out of.
Well, I would say you should make a schedule for yourself and follow it every day. Don't let your days be empty just sitting in bed all day. Trust me, it does not help. Coming from someone who did that for 4 months. Also, have regular meals and make sure you go for short walks. Don't let your thoughts in your head take over. And always remember to be careful. The personal lives of these few adolescents may speak for many who have gone through the lockdown. However, these experiences might not apply to all. A professional opinion might be of help. A string of research performed by a team led by Dr. Maria Lodes, a clinical psychologist from the Department of Psychology at the University of Bath, established how disease containment measures, quarantine, could impact the mental health of both children and adolescents in a negative manner. Through a rapid review performed by the aforementioned team, 83 articles regarding the topic of mental health effects of self-isolation, published between 1946 and 2020, were found. The studies performed often included children and adolescents, with the participants of the test experiencing either social isolation or loneliness. The average age of the participants were 15.3, boys around the same age as me. The assessment performed suggested that social isolation and loneliness leads to depression, anxiety, trauma, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and an overall dent in the mental well-being of the participants. The team investigating the subject also came to the conclusion that younger people were upwards of 3 times more likely to develop depression in the months or years following their time spent in social isolation. With the impact of self-isolation affecting their mental health severely starting from 3 months until possibly 9 years after the time spent in quarantine. Children and adolescents are probably more likely to experience high rates of depression and probably anxiety during and after the enforced isolation ends. The aforementioned symptoms are for those who spent mere weeks in isolation. We spent 4 months. For 4 months, most adolescents spent their lives in an isolated state, barely socializing with the outside world. Cooped up in our homes for 4 months. This, according to the aforementioned research, should be enough to cause permanent effects on the minds of those who self-isolated. With the COVID-19 lockdown, the traumas mentioned previously have a higher risk of arising and affecting the recipient's future. Children are defined by how they are raised. Like a sponge, children absorb the information given to them by their parents and friends. Which makes it awfully unfortunate when children are raised in bad home life situations in which a parent can be physically or mentally abusive. With the after effects of experiencing social isolation and chronic loneliness, trauma is likely to occur in the victim. Trauma that can define the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, trauma often clouds one's views on right and wrong, which can lead to moments where one is either physically or emotionally abusive to their loved ones. Millions of people have experienced unbearable trauma throughout this entire year, whether that be trauma caused by either fear of catching the virus, spreading it to a loved one, actually catching the virus, or having a loved one pass away from the virus. At the time of recording, more than 26 million people have been affected by the COVID-19 virus, and almost 1 million have lost their lives due to the pandemic. The experience of a pandemic is not a common one on this earth, with the last pandemic occurring in 1918, over 100 years ago. With all that said, whilst informative, it's not helpful. What can a society do to aid us in our time of need? Whilst it is reckless and irresponsible to go outside and socialize, it is also crucial that you do not self-isolate yourself completely from the people that you enjoy the company of. The effects of isolation have a significant negative impact on a large percentile of adolescents, contributing to conditions that may develop either in quarantine or in the future, months after the time spent in social isolation. Mental health risks of isolation and loneliness include commonly depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. However, in cases where social isolation has occurred for many months to years, schizophrenia, dementia, or Alzheimer's disease can occur as well. It is reported that many have committed suicide as well as an effect of the aforementioned mental health problems. Whilst the previous symptoms don't affect the majority percentage of people that perform social isolation regarding schizophrenia, dementia, and Alzheimer's, with entire countries in lockdown, the effects of the social isolation affects almost every adolescent in those nations, therefore meaning that an increased wave of mental health issues will arise in the next generation if isolation is not done correctly. World Health Organization encourages people to socialize with their friends, family, and co-workers by talking regularly online through texting, calling, video chatting, playing games, or on other online platforms. Often people adapt to circumstances that are alarming from the outside, and quarantine is not a situation one should adapt to, since it would make it much harder for you to get back into your regular life post-quarantine. The expectations that adolescents often put on themselves already result in many health problems originating from stress. However, with the current world climate regarding socializing, many can feel increased symptoms of isolation depending on where they reside and what their home situation is. For many, it can seem like the entire world is crashing down on top of them, like nothing has been going right for the past 9 months. And they wouldn't be wrong. But that does not change the fact that things can improve, but only if significant effort is put towards improving oneself. The following interview with psychologist Lorana Brouwer of the GGZ can help provide a professional opinion on the struggles that are occurring to millions of people worldwide, as well as information that can aid in softening the blows done to the mental health of the world's population. Firstly, to get a bit of context on the effects of loneliness and self-isolation, let's find out, how does self-isolation actually affect the human brain?
Self-isolation, whether it is self-inflicted or due to an outside effect such as COVID quarantine, has significant negative effects on human brain as it triggers many psychological conditions related to anxiety and depression.
So through your expertise, what are some mental health problems that develop through self-isolation and loneliness?
Experimental studies present that inflicted social isolation, especially when it is prolonged for a long time, can lead to depression, anxiety, and in advanced cases to psychosis-like behavior and even suicide. A large body of literature on the young individuals who experience isolation in their lives are more depressed and more vulnerable to suicide than those who have strong social ties with others. The long period of forced isolation is a catalyzing factor to the fear of catching a deadly virus and infecting your loved ones, which already are very traumatic experiences for youngsters who are at the very beginning of their character development.
So within our current generation, due to the world problems, pressure from society, bullying, amongst many other reasons, teenagers often develop mental health problems such as anxiety disorder, depression, in addition to many other conditions. Now, with a high demographic of people that already suffer from these mental conditions, how do you think our generation has been affected by the long-lasting lockdown a couple months previous?
Surely the effect of such an extraordinary event like a global pandemic happening at one's lifetime is already a very unusual change for anyone at any age, but working with your age group, we experience more cases coming up with loneliness, low self-esteem, anxiety, OCD, depression, and suicidal thoughts in the past 6 months. Than increased number of cases and their severity level showed us that teenagers like yourself are in a group of the worst affected by the isolation effect that was brought by a forced quarantine and afterwards by a psychological quarantine that most of the youngsters inflicted upon themselves with the continuous fear of pandemic.
Do you think the teenage mind is more susceptible to long-lasting mental health problems from this quarantine? If so, why?
There are not many studies concluded on this yet, so we cannot really say that there is a scientific evidence on the matter, but increasing the number of cases related to quarantine is an undeniable fact, and most of these cases show serious levels of depression that has to be treated for a longer period of time.
So now that we know that self-isolation could have horrible effects, what would you say? In what ways can self-isolation have a positive effect on the mind?
Well, it would be a cliche, but also a fact that what does not kill us makes us stronger. From this survival point of view, like after a tragic or drastic event like surviving a war, death, or an illness, our social brain is wired to get more susceptible to overcome difficulties by adjusting to the new norms. In an isolation situation, our brain can learn to be sufficient and calm, can organize its activities, and learn new skills. Staying active in brain helps to increase self-esteem, keeping good relations with peers online, talking, gaming, participating in any kind of virtual social activity would bring some relief and helps mental stability. People who go through traumas adapt new norms quicker due to the necessity of survival. This mostly provides them with advanced coping mechanisms and even creativity.
So what advice would you give to those who have developed mental struggles as a result of this quarantine, whether that be through self-isolation itself or a loved one catching the virus?
I would advise them to seek social interaction as well as professional help to cope with this change in their life. Nowadays, with the help of technology, the new generation have many tools to socially interact with their peers, and it is a very important point that they should try to achieve in order to cope with the new normal. In cases that there is an acute traumatizing happening or a long-term exposure to self-isolation, I would advise them to seek professional help in order to understand themselves and the situation that shapes their new norms.
That's very interesting. Well, thank you, Ms. Brower. Thank you for the interview and thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
When looking at the previous research tabs, it is clear that with this quarantine that we have experienced for a majority of this year, symptoms such as depression, anxiety, trauma, OCD, schizophrenia, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease, just to name a few, can be prevalent in millions of people due to the longitude of isolation that we have been subjected to. In addition, as the bearers of the next generation have experienced this quarantine as well, the issues that commonly arise may affect them in the millions, thus meaning that we as a society can have massive sociological and physiological problems in the future. As home life often defines a child's future, how do you think the next generations will survive with the horrible effects that have been and are still being experienced by adolescents during the COVID-19 lockdown? The most influential problems experienced by people are often lessons or traumas they carry relationship to relationship, and eventually to a family life where they may be a parental figure. This means that due to how bad their mental health possibly was affected in the past quarantine, qualities that could create a bad home life for your possible children may arise. If our current generation suffers as a result of isolation, similar to the ones shown earlier in the documentary, it implies that the next generations to come will be growing up in the rubble left from the trauma of the events of the last 6 months. But it is not all negative, as we humans always find a way to survive even in the most difficult conditions, as coded into our genes for generations. In order to develop coping mechanisms, children and adolescents should share their experiences, help each other by talking, acting, gaming interactively, to see that they are not alone in this traumatic situation and the changes that they are going through. They should also interact with their families, relatives, in a loving, caring environment to share the psychological burden that the isolation brings. And last but not least, they should be open to seek help from professionals who are here to help them learn to understand themselves and their surroundings better, so that they can develop a healthy coping mechanism to pass through difficulties and reach good times. Overall, we can get through this time together only if we help each other. Thank you for listening. We have gone through harder burdens in our history, and we will go through this as well. We just have to make sure we're not affected by it, and we need to learn from our mistakes rather than repeat the mistakes of the past.